A woman who uses a wheelchair was trapped and forced to watch something terrible. Mean guys held her chair so she couldn't move, and they were kicking her special helper dog over and over. The dog, who always knew when she was sad, could only cry out because he was getting hurt. The men were laughing because they thought their rich families would keep them out of trouble no matter what they did. But they didn't know someone was watching. A man was jogging in the park, and he happened to be a Navy SEAL, which means he's trained to protect people. He was about to teach them a lesson they would remember forever. Before we start, tell us where you're from, and if you like this story, please subscribe for more. It was super hot in Savannah, Georgia that day. The heat didn't just make you warm, it wrapped around you like a heavy wet blanket. You could smell the sweet jasmine flowers and the muddy river. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the famous Forsyth Park was glowing with golden sunlight. Huge old oak trees, with gray moss hanging from them like decorations, made cool shadows on the walking paths. Iris Parker could feel the sticky warmth on her arms and forehead while she worked. She was sitting near the beautiful white water fountain with her sketchbook on a special desk attached to her wheelchair. In front of her was an easel holding a canvas where she was painting the water and light. Iris was in her late 20s, with smart dark eyes and messy hair tied up to stay cool. She was a painter, and people were starting to notice her work at local art galleries because she was so good at capturing the spooky, beautiful feeling of the area. 3 years ago, a drunk driver crashed into her, and she couldn't use her legs anymore. But even though she lost the use of her legs, her hands and eyes became even more focused and skilled. Her wheelchair was lightweight and custom-made, and it was simply how she moved around the world. Next to her, lying on the grass, was Valor. He was a beautiful German shepherd with shiny black and tan fur. He wasn't just a pet. He was her specially trained service dog, always there to help and comfort her. He wasn't wearing his official vest because he was resting, but he was always alert. He watched the tourists, the joggers, and the squirrels. Sometimes his head would tilt, but he stayed connected to how Iris was feeling, like a silent guardian. She stopped painting for a moment and reached down to scratch the soft fur behind his ear. "It's too hot even for ghosts today, huh boy?" she said softly. Valor's tail thumped twice on the ground, quietly saying he agreed. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind of quiet that helped her paint better. The sounds of the city were far away, blocked by all the trees. Then the peace was suddenly destroyed by the loud roar of an expensive sports car. A shiny blue convertible that was way too expensive and noisy for these old streets screeched to a stop at the edge of the park. The tires screamed against the road, and the super loud music felt like it was attacking the quiet air. 3 young men jumped out, laughing really loud. They all looked the same, wearing expensive polo shirts, boat shoes with no socks, and sunglasses that cost more than what Iris paid for her art studio each month. The one who got out of the driver's seat was clearly the leader. This was Preston, but people called him Press Davenport IV. He was tall with messy blonde hair that was styled to look careless, and he had the easy, confident attitude of someone who had never been told no in his whole life. His family's name was on half the buildings in the city because they owned so much property and businesses, and he walked around like he owned everything. With him were Chad Albright, who was stocky and broad-shouldered, and Brody Croft, who was tall and skinny and nervous. They both acted like fans and bodyguards for President. They were bored, rich, and looking for something to do. Their eyes scanned the park and landed on the easiest target, the woman in the wheelchair and her dog. They started walking over, and their voices carried across the park. "Look at that ugly dog," Press said loud enough for Iris to hear. "Think it can do any tricks?" Chad laughed and picked up a small stick, tossing it toward Valor. "Fetch, dog, fetch." Valor ignored the stick and didn't move, but his body got tense. He quietly stood up from lying down and placed himself right between Iris's wheelchair and the men walking toward them. He wasn't being aggressive, just protective, like a living shield. Iris sighed, her focus broken, and her hand tightened on her paintbrush. "He's a service dog," she called out, her voice firm and clear. "He's working, so please leave him alone." She hated having to confront them, but she hated people being cruel even more. Her request seemed to make them laugh. "Oh, it's a service dog," Press mocked. making air quotes with his fingers. He stepped closer, right into Iris's personal space. Vala didn't growl, but a low rumbling sound came from deep in his chest. "He looks mean," Brody said, stopping a few feet away. "He's not mean," Iris said, looking directly at Press and locking eyes with him. "He's trained. So please go away. You're bothering us." For a moment, Preston Davenport IV just stared at her. It was a look of total disbelief. He, the heir to the Davenport fortune, was being told to leave by her, a girl in a wheelchair. The amusement left his face and was replaced by a sudden cold flash of anger. His ego, which was fragile but huge, had been hurt. "What did you say to me?" he asked, his voice dropping low. "I said go away," Iris repeated, refusing to look down. That was her mistake. She had challenged him and failed to show him the respect he thought he deserved. "You don't tell me what to do," Press sneered. He took a sip from a metal flask he pulled from his pocket. The smell of expensive whiskey cut through the hot air. Then he casually flicked the small metal cap, hitting Valor sharply on the nose. Valor yelped, a short, surprised sound of pain, shaking his head. That was it. "Stop it," Iris yelled, her voice sharp. "Get away from him." Press smiled, but it was a terrible thin smile. "You hurt her guys," he said to his friends. "She wants us to go." He looked back at Iris, his eyes glittering. "But I don't think we will. I think you need to be taught some manners." He nodded to his friends. "Hold her." Chad and Brody hesitated for just a second because they hadn't planned on this. But a sharp look from Press made them move. Before Iris could react, they came to her sides. Chad grabbed the handle of her left wheel, and Brody grabbed the right, holding the chair so she couldn't move. "Don't touch me," Iris shouted, panic rising in her throat. She struggled, but the chair was held tight. "Let go of my chair." Valor, seeing his owner trapped and sensing her terror, finally broke his calm stance. He lunged forward, barking deeply, trying to protect her from Chad. But he never made it. Press was faster. With a vicious practiced motion, he kicked hard, and his boat shoe connected with Valor's ribs. The dog let out a strangled cry and collapsed onto the grass. The wind knocked out of him. "No," Iris screamed, trying to lunge forward, but the chair wouldn't move. Press stepped over to her, his shadow falling across her canvas. He grabbed her hair and yanked her head back, forcing her to look at him. "You shut your mouth," he hissed. The smell of whiskey was strong on his breath. Then, with an open palm, he slapped her hard. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet park. Iris's head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding in pain, and tears sprang to her eyes more from shock and embarrassment than from the sting. She was trapped, completely helpless. "Now," Press whispered, his voice dangerously calm as he held her hair and forced her head to turn toward the dog. Valor was struggling to get to his feet, wheezing, his eyes fixed on Iris. "You're going to sit right there, and you're going to watch. You're going to watch while we teach this stupid dog what happens when it barks at me." He let go of her hair with a shove and turned to Brody. "Kick him." Brody looked sick but didn't dare refuse. As Iris watched in frozen horror, unable to move, unable to scream, trapped by the hands holding her chair, Press and Brody moved toward the wounded German shepherd. The first kick landed, and Iris finally found her voice. It wasn't a word, just a raw, desperate sound of pain that echoed uselessly under the ancient, uncaring oak trees. 200 yards away on the park's jogging path, Hugo Scott was almost done with his 5-mile run. He was a man built of solid muscle and quiet strength, moving with an easy, steady pace that showed he could run forever. His face was angular, his eyes were a deep, focused gray, and his short brown hair was dark with sweat. Hugo was an active-duty Navy SEAL, and he was on a short mandatory break in Savannah to rest after a mission he was already trying to forget. He ran without headphones, which was a habit from his job. Being aware was how you survived, even at home. The park's background noise was familiar, distant traffic, students laughing, cicadas buzzing. He was filtering it all out and focused on his breathing until two sounds cut through everything. The first was the sharp, pained yelp of a dog. The second, a split second later, was a woman's scream. Not a startled shriek, but a raw, desperate cry of no. Hugo's body reacted before his mind finished thinking. His pace didn't break, but his direction changed. He pivoted on his foot, jumped over a low hedge, and cut across the open grass, his eyes scanning and searching. The scene registered in his mind like a cold tactical picture. One woman in a wheelchair held in place by two men, one man standing over her looking triumphant, and a second man kicking a German shepherd on the ground. Three hostiles, one primary victim, one secondary. His speed increased, but it was controlled and silent. His feet barely seemed to touch the grass. He was a ghost moving through the sunlight. He didn't shout a warning, because warnings are gifts you give to people you don't see as threats. These men were threats. Chad Albright, the stocky one holding the left wheel of Iris's chair, was laughing at the dog's cry when he suddenly felt crushing pressure around his neck. An arm as hard as a steel cable had locked around his throat from behind. He didn't even have time to be surprised. His hands flew up, clawing uselessly at the forearm cutting off his air, and his vision narrowed. Hugo applied the choke hold with practiced, devastating skill. He held it for exactly 3 seconds, just until Chad's body went limp, then released him, letting him drop to the grass like a discarded sack. He had made no sound. The entire takedown was silent. Press and Brody were still focused on valor, enjoying their power. Brody, the tall, skinny one, was drawing back his foot for another kick when a flicker of movement, the shadow of Chad falling, made him turn. He saw a shape, a new man, and his eyes widened in confusion. That confusion was all the time Hugo needed. Hugo didn't waste motion on winding up a punch. He took one step, closing the gap, and delivered a palm heel strike directly to Brody's stomach. The impact was dull, a heavy, sickening thud. All the air in Brody's lungs left in a single desperate gasp that made no noise. His eyes bulged and he folded in on himself, clutching his stomach as he crumpled to his knees, unable to breathe, unable to think. 2 threats stopped in under 5 seconds. Now there was only one. Preston Davenport the fourth spun around. His cruel smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed look of pure shock. His 2 friends were on the ground. Standing between him and them was a man unlike anyone he had ever seen. This wasn't a fellow student or an angry local. This was something else. Hugo was breathing calmly, not even heavily from his run. He was covered in sweat, his muscles were defined, and his gray eyes were absolutely flat, empty of any emotion Press could recognize except for a cold, terrifying focus. Press's mind, which moved so quickly when he was in control, just stalled. He saw his escape route, the car, and he saw the man blocking it. He raised his hands, a pathetic, reflexive gesture of surrender. "Hey, man," he stammered, his voice cracking. We were just, it was a joke. We were just joking." Hugo took one slow, deliberate step toward him. He didn't raise his voice because he didn't have to. The quiet of the park suddenly seemed to make his words echo louder. "You joked," Hugo stated, his voice a low, gravelly monotone that was more chilling than any shout. Press flinched, his confidence disappearing so completely it was like it had never existed. He was a child, small and terrified, standing before a true predator. He began to back away, stumbling over his own feet. "I'm sorry," he whispered, a word he had likely never used sincerely. We're going." Hugo stopped, letting him keep the distance. He looked from Press to the whimpering dog, then to the woman in the chair who was staring at him with her hand over her mouth, her face stained with tears and a bright red mark on her cheek. His gaze snapped back to Press, and the cold focus ignited into a flicker of pure, controlled hatred. Press physically pulled back from the look. "Get him," Hugo ordered, nodding at the gasping Brody. "And him." He pointed to the unconscious Chad. "Get them out of here." Press, desperate to obey, scrambled to pull Brody to his feet. Brody was still wheezing, with snot and tears running down his face as he tried to stand. "Now," Hugo said, his voice dropping even lower. Press and Brody, clumsy with panic, half-dragged, half-carried Chad's dead weight across the grass toward the convertible. They threw him into the back seat, scrambled into the front, and fumbled with the key. Press looked back one last time, his face pale with terror. Hugo was still standing there, watching him. He hadn't moved. The engine roared to life, and the car peeled out, tires screaming in protest, leaving the smell of burnt rubber and expensive cologne hanging in the heavy savanna air. The park was suddenly violently quiet. The only sounds were Iris's ragged choked sobs and the high-pitched painful whining of Valor, who was trying to drag himself toward her. Hugo stood for a moment, his fist slowly unclenching, his breathing steady. The adrenaline left, leaving behind a familiar dull ache. He turned, the dangerous shadow disappearing, and his full attention settled on Iris and her dog. The shriek of the convertible's tires faded, leaving a sudden ringing silence in Forsyth Park. The air, which moments before had been electric with violence and fear, now felt heavy and still, thick with what had just happened. Iris Parker was trembling so hard her wheelchair vibrated. Her breaths were coming in short, gasping sobs. The bright red mark on her cheek throbbed in time with her racing pulse. Valor, her brave broken dog, was whining, a high-pitched agonizing sound as he tried to crawl the last few feet to her, his back legs dragging slightly. She was frozen, her mind unable to connect the terror of the attack with this sudden shocking quiet. The man who had saved them was still standing where the car had been, his back to her. He was like a statue of coiled tension, his hands still in fists, his shoulders broad and rigid. Iris watched him, also terrified of him. He had appeared like a ghost and had taken down 3 men with a speed that was inhuman. Then he moved. Iris flinched, but he didn't turn toward her, not yet. He rolled his shoulders, a single deliberate motion. His head dropped, and he took one long, deep breath. His entire body seemed to deflate, the dangerous tension draining out of him like water. His fisted hand slowly opened, his fingers stretching. When he finally turned, the man who faced her was not the same one who had confronted President. The flat, cold killer's eyes were gone. In their place was a look of deep, caring concern, a focused quiet that was just as intense but completely different. He walked toward her, his movements economical, his eyes moving between her and the whimpering dog. He stopped a few feet away, careful not to crowd her, and his gaze settled on Valor. "Is he friendly?" His voice was low and calm, a different texture from the gravelly command that had terrified President. It was a voice, she thought, that was used to being heard, a voice that made you feel safe. Iris could only nod, unable to find her own words. He gave her a single nod and moved past her to the dog. He didn't just kneel. He dropped into a professional crouch, his hands hovering over Valor's body before making contact. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Easy, I'm going to check you out." Valor, who would normally be scared of a strange man, seemed to sense the confidence in his touch. He whined but allowed the examination, his tail giving a single sad thump. Iris watched, mesmerized by the contrast. The hands that had moved with blinding brutal speed were now impossibly gentle. His fingers, rough and strong, touched Valor's ribs, his head, his legs with the light practiced touch of a medic. On his running belt, Iris now noticed a small black zippered pouch. He unzipped it, showing a tightly packed first aid kit. It wasn't a normal runner's kit. It looked professional, military. "Well," Hugo said, his voice calm, "he's got at least 2 broken ribs. I can feel. Possibly 3. You did good, boy. You took the hits." He pulled out a roll of compression bandage. "He needs an emergency vet immediately, but this will keep the ribs stable for the ride, so he can breathe easier." As Iris watched him work, his movements quick and sure, her shock began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of confusion. This man was a walking contradiction. He was a storm of violence one second, and a gentle caregiver the next. He had saved them. He had saved Valor. The tears that had been frozen by fear began to flow again, this time from a well of gratitude so deep it ached. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "You they were." Hugo didn't look up from his work, keeping his focus on the dog. "I know," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Just breathe. He's okay. You're okay. They're gone." He finished wrapping Valor's body, securing the bandage with a practiced rip. He gave the dog one last pat on the head before standing. Now his full attention settled on her. He crouched in front of her wheelchair, bringing himself down to her eye level. His gray eyes scanned her face, and his gaze hardened as he focused on the bright red hand-shaped mark on her cheek. He didn't reach out to touch it, which she was grateful for because she felt like she might shatter. But his closeness was intense and focused. "He hit you," he stated. It wasn't a question. The coldness she'd seen earlier flickered back into his eyes, a dangerous spark in the depths. Are you hurt anywhere else? Did they do anything else? Iris shook her head, pulling what was left of her composure around her. No, just that. He held my hair. I'm okay. He nodded slowly, accepting her answer, though his jaw stayed tight. Good. He stood up, his gaze sweeping the area. Her sketchbook was on the ground, open, with dirty pages. Her brushes were scattered. Where's your van? He asked. The blue van. She pointed, her hand trembling. Over on Bull Street. It has a ramp. He nodded. Stay here. He moved with purpose, gathering her easel, her paints, her scattered brushes, folding the legs, and securing her lap desk. He did it neatly, showing he'd done things like this before. He packed her art bag, his movements showing no awkwardness, and hung it from the back of her chair. Then he returned to Valor. Okay, boy, he said softly, time to go. With one smooth, powerful motion, Hugo scooped the 80-pound German shepherd into his arms. He lifted him like he weighed nothing, cradling him against his chest. Valor yelped once, then settled, seeming to understand he was being helped. Lead the way, Hugo said to Iris. She pushed the wheels of her chair, her arms aching, her mind numb, leading her savior, who was carrying her other savior, to the van. He waited patiently as she used her remote to unlock the doors and open the side ramp. He watched her guide the chair up and lock it into the driver's position, his expression unreadable. Once she was secure, he stepped into the van, moving past her to the open space in the back. He gently laid Valor on a blanket she kept there. He'll be okay for the ride, he said. He stepped back out, standing on the sidewalk as she turned her chair to face him. The moment hung between them. I don't know who you are, she said, her voice small, or how I can ever. He cut her off, not unkindly. He was already pulling a small waterproof notebook and a pen from his first aid pouch. He tore out a page and wrote a number on it. Get him to an emergency vet now, he said. The gentleness was gone, replaced by a tone of command, but it felt protective, not aggressive. He handed her the small, damp piece of paper. My name is Hugo. I'm in town for 2 more weeks. That's my number. He locked his gaze with hers. If you have any more trouble from them, even if they just drive by, or for any other reason, you call me. Day or night. It doesn't matter. Do you understand? Iris looked from the number written in strong, blocky handwriting to his face. His gray eyes weren't cold, and they weren't warm. They were just steady, present. He was seeing her, not her chair, not her tears, just her. And in his eyes she saw a deep, unspoken understanding. He had seen the world's ugliness, and he had chosen to stand against it. She clutched the paper. Yes, she whispered, I understand. He nodded once, a sharp, definite movement. Be safe, Iris. He knew her name. He must have seen it on her sketchbook. He stepped back from the van. Iris hit the button to close the ramp and the door, her hand shaking. She started the engine, her eyes meeting his one last time through the window before she pulled away. Hugo Scott stood on the sidewalk, a solitary figure in the humid Savannah heat, watching until the blue van disappeared around the corner. The drive to the Savannah Emergency Vet Clinic was a blur of adrenaline and muffled sobs. Iris's hands were slippery, with sweat on the special hand controls of her van. Her cheek was throbbing, and her mind kept replaying the sickening thud of the kicks landing on Valor's body. Hugo's makeshift wrap was stark white against her dog's dark fur in the rearview mirror. Valor himself was quiet, too quiet, his breathing shallow, and that silence terrified her more than his whining had. She clutched the small, damp piece of paper with Hugo's number in her hand, the ink already blurring slightly. It felt like the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted off its axis. She pulled into the emergency bay, deployed her ramp, and rushed inside, her wheels squeaking on the floor as she pushed Valor's stretcher, which a worker had thankfully brought out to the van. They were met by Dr. Eris Thorne, a tall, kind-eyed man in his 40s, with a calming presence and gentle hands. He had a way of speaking to both animals and their humans with the same level of respect. Let's get him in the back, Iris. What happened here? He asked, his eyes immediately checking the dog's condition and noticing the bad fresh bruise on Iris's own face. Iris stammered out a broken version of the events. He was attacked, kicked in the park by some men. Dr. Thorne's expression tightened, but he nodded, his professionalism taking over. We'll take good care of him. Let us get some x-rays and check for internal bleeding. Our worker will be out to get your statement. Iris was left in the sterile, brightly lit waiting room, the antiseptic smell doing nothing to calm her nerves. An hour later, Dr. Thorne returned, his face serious. Well, your friend in the park was exactly right, he said, holding up an x-ray to the light. 3 broken ribs, right here, here and here. Bad deep bruising across his back and stomach. No internal bleeding, thank goodness. He's a very tough, very lucky dog. He paused, his gaze softening. And what about you? That looks really painful. Iris just shook her head, the tears she'd been holding back spilling over. They held my chair while they did it, she whispered. They made me watch. Dr. Thorne's jaw clenched. Iris, I have to ask, do you know who did this? You need to go to the police. The anger, which had been buried by fear, finally began to burn. He was right. She wasn't just a victim, she was a witness. She had a license plate number. She paid the huge vet bill, arranged for Valor to stay overnight for watching, and drove her van straight to the main building of the Savannah-Chatham Metropolitan Police. The building felt old, smelling of stale coffee and paperwork. She rolled up to the high desk, finding herself looking up at a man who seemed stuck to the chair he sat in. This was Officer Miller, the desk sergeant. He was a middle-aged man with a wrinkled uniform, a tired face, and a look that suggested he had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. Help you? He asked, not looking up from his computer screen. Iris took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to report an assault, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. On myself and on my service animal. That got his attention barely. He sighed, pulling a form toward him. All right, name. She gave him her information. And what happened? Iris told the story for the 3rd time, her voice getting a sharp, angry edge as she detailed the events. She described Press, Chad, and Brody. She described the taunts, the shove on Valor, the way they held her chair, the slap to her face, and the repeated vicious kicks to her dog. She was clear and precise. Officer Miller typed, his expression one of pure, emotionless boredom. And you say they were in a blue convertible? He asked. Yes, Iris said, feeling a small surge of triumph. And I got the license plate. She read the numbers, clearly from a note she'd written at the vet. Miller typed them into the system, and just like that, everything changed. Miller stopped typing. He visibly stiffened, his bored face vanishing. He read the screen, his lips pursed, then slowly leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing at Iris. It was a new look, one of suspicion, of judgment. A blue convertible, you said, he said, belonging to Preston Davenport IV. He said the name as if it were a complete sentence, an explanation and a dismissal all in one. That's a pretty serious accusation to make against a family like that, ma'am. Iris was stunned by the change. It's not an accusation, she said, her grip tightening on her wheels. It's what happened. He slapped me. He kicked my dog. Officer Miller laced his fingers over his stomach, his gaze turning cold. Look, Miss Parker, the Davenports are important people in this city. You're sure you didn't provoke them in some way? Maybe your dog was aggressive? They're going to say your dog was aggressive. A big shepherd like that. Iris felt the blood drain from her face. He's a service dog. They provoked him. They held my chair. Miller just shook his head slowly, a pitying look on his face. You have to understand how this looks. A girl like you picking a fight with the Davenport heir. A girl like me, Iris repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You mean a girl in a wheelchair? He raised his hands. I'm just saying it's your word against his, and his word carries a lot of weight in Savannah. He finished typing something, hit enter with a loud smack, and closed the report. I filed it, he said, his tone final. We'll look into it. But his eyes said it all. The report was just paperwork, meant to be buried. She was being dismissed. Power had spoken before she had even been allowed to. Iris sat in silence for a long moment. The unfairness of it felt like a physical weight in her chest. She turned her wheelchair and rolled out of the police station without another word, the faint sound of Miller already answering the next phone call behind her. She drove home to her small studio apartment, a converted warehouse space downtown that she loved. Her refuge. Now it felt cold. She was exhausted, bruised, and felt completely powerless. Vala was at the vet. Her face throbbed, and the men who did this were probably at a bar laughing about it. Her sanctuary, her studio, was filled with her paintings, vibrant canvases of the savannah marshes and city squares, but the joy was gone. She was staring at a half-finished piece, a painting of the oaks in Forsyth, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again, persistently. She answered, her voice tired. "Hello." The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, and completely without warmth. "Am I speaking with Miss Iris Parker?" "Yes," she said. "My name is Arthur Harrison. I am legal counsel for the Davenport family. It has come to our attention that you had an unfortunate encounter with Preston Davenport this afternoon." Iris sat up, her heart hammering. "An unfortunate encounter? He assaulted me. He nearly killed my dog." Harrison's voice didn't change, staying calm and reasonable. "Yes, a terrible misunderstanding. Preston feels awful about the whole thing. He's a young man, very passionate, and he was under the impression your dog was lunging at him. He acted in self-defense. As for the situation with you, he merely brushed past you in his rush to defend himself." The boldness of the lie took her breath away. "That is not what happened. I went to the police. I filed a report." There was a soft, almost amused chuckle on the other end. "Ah, yes, the report, which brings me to the point of my call, Miss Parker. The Davenports are generous people. They are fully prepared to cover all of Mr. Valor's vet expenses, no questions asked, a sign of goodwill." A pause. "In exchange for your signature on a simple agreement where you don't tell anyone what happened. Of course, we wouldn't want this misunderstanding to be misinterpreted by the public." Iris felt a cold dread settle over her. "And if I don't sign? If I tell people what really happened?" The lawyer's voice lost its fake warmth, becoming as hard and cold as marble. "Then we will have a problem. The Davenports will of course be forced to protect their good name. We would file a lawsuit against you for lying and harassment. Mr. Davenport has 2 witnesses who will say that your dog attacked them without warning and that you were verbally abusive." "That's a lie," Iris shouted. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "I took the liberty of looking into your studio lease. A wonderful space. Your landlord, Mr. Henderson, does a great deal of business with the Davenport Shipping Company. It would be a tragedy if this misunderstanding were to put that relationship in danger. I'm sure Mr. Henderson would be forced to end your lease immediately." The threat hung in the air, complete and suffocating. It was brilliant, it was evil. They would take her dog, her name, and her art. Iris was trembling, speechless. "I will have a courier send the agreement to your studio in the morning. Miss Parker, you are a smart woman. I trust you will make the smart decision." The line clicked. Iris sat in the silence, her world reduced to the 4 walls of her studio. They had her. They had won. Her eyes fell on the small damp piece of paper on her workbench, a phone number. "If you have any more trouble, you call me." She wasn't just in trouble. She was trapped. Her hand shaking, reached for the phone. Iris's hand was shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone, let alone tap the screen. The lawyer's voice, a smooth, poisonous whisper, echoed in the silence of her studio. "End your lease." He had threatened her art. He had threatened her home. He had threatened the one thing she had built for herself after the accident. The police wouldn't help. The law was already bought. She was completely, utterly alone, and the walls of her refuge suddenly felt like the walls of a trap. Her eyes landed on the damp, crumpled piece of paper Hugo had given her. "If you have any more trouble, you call me." This was more than trouble. This was destruction. She wasn't calling him to be her hero. She didn't even know him. She was calling him because he was the only other person on earth who had seen what really happened in that park. She was calling him to hear a single voice that believed her before the darkness swallowed her whole. She pressed the number. It rang twice, a sharp sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. Yeah, his voice was instant, sharp, and alert. Not a hello, but an acknowledgement. "Hugo, this is Iris from the park, with the dog." She cringed at how small and broken her voice sounded. "I am so sorry to bother you. I know you said to call. But I didn't know who else." A sob she'd been fighting broke free, thick and ragged. "Hey," his voice changed instantly. The sharp edge was gone, replaced by a low, calm focus. "Breathe, talk to me. Are you hurt? Are they there?" "No, no," she stammered, trying to get air. "It was a lawyer for that man, Davenport. He called me. He said they'd pay for valor, but I have to sign something. And if I don't, he said they'd sue me. He said my dog attacked them. He said they'd take my studio. They'll have me kicked out." She was crying openly now, the embarrassment and helplessness overwhelming her. "He knew my landlord's name. Hugo, he knew." "How did he?" There was a second of pure cold silence on the other end. When Hugo spoke again, his voice was different. It was flat, calm, and absolutely terrifying. It was the voice he had used on President. "Where are you right now?" "My studio, my apartment," she whispered. "Are you on the ground floor?" "First floor, above a shop." "Is your door locked?" Yes, it's locked." "Good, stay there. Don't answer it for anyone but me. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He didn't say goodbye. The line simply clicked dead. The suddenness of it, the absolute certainty in his command, cut through her panic. It was a lifeline. For 10 minutes, she sat perfectly still, listening to every creak in the old building, her heart pounding. Exactly 10 minutes later, there was a quiet, specific knock on her door. Not a police knock, not a friendly knock, just tap, tap, tap. She rolled her chair over, her hand slick on the wheels, and looked through the peephole. It was him. She unlocked the 3 locks she always fastened and pulled the door open. He was no longer the sweaty jogger. He'd showered and changed. He wore simple jeans and a dark gray t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders and chest, and he was carrying a small black plain backpack. He didn't smile. He didn't offer words of comfort. His gray eyes met hers for 1 second, taking in her tear-streaked face and the red mark which had now darkened to a deep, angry purple. Then his gaze swept past her into her studio, scanning the room in a single all-seeing glance. "I'm sorry," she started. "Let me see the room," he said, stepping inside. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked around her large open studio. It was one big room with a small kitchen in one corner, a bed in another, and the rest filled with canvases, easels, and the wonderful sharp smell of turpentine and oil paint. He went to the front windows first, the large, beautiful arched windows that looked out onto the street. "Fire escape," he noted, touching the latch. "Old, easy to break into." He moved to her front door and examined the frame, the dead bolts. "Good locks," he admitted, "but the frame is old wood. A hard kick would break it." He unzipped his backpack. Iris watched, confused, as he pulled out a small gray plastic device, a roll of what looked like gray duct tape, and some thin, strong wire. "This is 100-mile-an-hour tape," he said, his voice matter-of-fact as he worked. "We call it that for a reason." He taped the small device, which she now saw was a personal alarm, to the wall beside her door. He then unrolled a short length of wire, attaching one end to the alarm's pin and the other to the edge of the door. The wire stretched tight when the door was closed. "If anyone breaks that lock and opens this door more than an inch," he said, "it pulls the pin. This thing makes 130 decibel sound. It'll wake the dead, and it'll wake you." He did the same for the main window, creating a simple invisible tripwire. When he was finished, he stood in the center of the room. He seemed to listen, not with his ears, but with his whole body. "It's secure," he said, "for now." Only then did he finally turn and look at her. He saw the terror that was still shaking behind her eyes. He saw the exhaustion, and he saw that she hadn't eaten. "Where's the nearest good Thai food?" he asked. The question was so strange, so normal. It took her a second to process. "What?" "Food," he said, pulling out his phone. "You need to eat. Thai or pizza?" There's a Thai place on Broadway. It's good." He found it on his phone, placed an order for 2, and gave them her address. 20 minutes, he said, putting the phone away. The crisis was over, the immediate threat was contained, and now there was only the quiet, awkward space between 2 strangers, connected by a moment of violence. He didn't sit, but walked over to her canvases, his hands clasped behind his back. He studied her paintings, the vibrant light-filled landscapes, the moody atmospheric oaks. "This is yours," he said, pointing to a large canvas of the salt marsh at sunrise. "It's good, really good. It's all I have," she whispered, the tears threatening again. "That lawyer, he knows this. He knows it's my life. He threatened to take it away. Just like that." They were quiet until the food arrived. Hugo paid the delivery person, his body angled protectively at the door, and brought the white paper containers to her small kitchen table. He found plates, found forks, and divided the food. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the simple human act of sharing a meal slowly chipping away at the tension. "Why are you doing this, Hugo?" she finally asked, setting her fork down. "You don't know me. You were terrifying in the park. You saved me. You didn't have to come here." "Why?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into his container of noodles as if gathering his thoughts. "When I was in the park," he said, his voice low, "I saw that man's face. President, he was enjoying it. He loved that you were trapped. He loved that he was hurting something that couldn't fight back." He looked up, and his gray eyes were haunted. "I grew up in a place where I saw that look a lot. Big men, small men, people who like to break things just to watch them break. People who use their power not to build anything, but just to hurt." He looked down at his own hands, rough and scarred. "I hated that look. I hated that feeling of helplessness. I decided a long time ago that I was going to be the man who stood on the other side of that. That's all. I don't like bullies." It was the simplest, most honest explanation she had ever heard. It wasn't a boast, it was a code. "And the accident?" he asked, his voice gentle, changing the subject, but his eyes told her he already knew. "Drunk driver," she said, her voice flat. "He ran a red light. I used to be a dancer ballet." She looked at her legs hidden under the table. The painting, this was what I had left. This is how I learned to be in the world again. "If they take this." "They won't," he said. It was a simple statement of fact. He wasn't promising. He was telling her. The silence that fell between them this time was different. It wasn't empty or awkward, it was full. Iris looked at this man, this stranger who had set up alarms in her house, and was sharing cheap Thai food with her, and she realized that for the first time since the lawyer's call, for the first time since the accident, she wasn't afraid. Her heart wasn't pounding. She felt safe. And Hugo looked at her strength, at the stubborn fire behind her eyes, at the purple bruise on her face, and he realized with a sudden jolting clarity that this was no longer about a random act of stepping in. This wasn't a mission, it was personal. Preston Davenport IV was not used to fear. He was used to anger, boredom, and a basic level of casual contempt for the world he moved through. But the cold, emotionless gray eyes of the man in the park had introduced him to a new sickening feeling, true terror. That terror, having sat for 12 hours, had soured into a deep, festering embarrassment. He wasn't just embarrassed, he'd been made to look weak in front of Chad and Brody. And worse, his father had found out. He wasn't called to the family's huge estate on the Isle of Hope. Instead, he was called to the downtown office of Arthur Harrison, the Davenport family's legal counsel. The office was a sterile glass and steel box high above the Savannah River, a place where problems were not solved but surgically removed. Arthur Harrison, a man in his 50s with a perfectly tailored suit and eyes as colorless as polished granite, was the family scalpel. "It was not the act, Preston, but the execution," Harrison said, his voice a calm, smooth monotone as he stared out the window. "Your father is displeased, not by your choice of entertainment, but by your sloppiness. You were seen, you were recorded by bystanders, and most importantly, you chose to engage with a man who our sources confirm is an active-duty naval special warfare operator." Harrison turned, his face a mask of disappointment. "You brought a tantrum to a gunfight, Preston. It was common." Press, slumped in a leather chair that cost more than a car, felt his face burn. "He put his hands on me. He embarrassed me." "He neutralized you," Harrison corrected, his voice cutting. "He neutralized your friends, and he neutralized you without leaving a mark that would hold up in court. And now the woman has filed a police report." Press sat up, his own anger overriding his fear. So fix it. You fixed the cop. You called her. Now fix him. Harrison almost smiled. A man like Hugo Scott cannot be fixed with a phone call. He is not a local policeman or a weak-willed landlord. He is a state-trained asset. We cannot touch him directly. The woman, however, a predatory light entered Harrison's eyes. She rejected my generous offer. This makes her a problem. A problem your father agrees must be handled. He leaned forward. You are angry. You wish to send a message. Fine, this is an opportunity to be strategic. To send a message that both you and I need delivered. He leaned forward further. She has a temporary weakness. Her dog is at the vet clinic being kept for observation. She is alone. He slid a key card across the desk. Mr. Henderson, her landlord, has been reminded of his long and fruitful relationship with the Davenport Corporation. He understands that for the next 24 hours, the alley service door to his building may have a faulty lock. What about her? Press asked, a cruel excitement building. She has to leave sometime. Harrison said, Go. Take your friends. Be quick. Be quiet. And this time, Preston, try not to be an idiot. The next morning, Iris felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in days normal. She had spoken to Hugo on the phone, a brief reassuring call. He had checked on her, his voice calm and steady. The simple trip wires he'd put on her door and fire escape window gave her a fragile sense of security. Valor was recovering well. Dr. Thorne said she could pick him up in the afternoon. But she was out of everything, no coffee, no food. She couldn't stay locked in her studio forever. She checked the alley from her window. It was empty. She checked the street, quiet. It was just a simple trip to the grocery store, 2 blocks away. She double-locked her door. The thin wire of Hugo's alarm looked reassuringly tight. She would be back in 20 minutes. The moment her wheelchair rounded the corner onto Broughton Street, a black SUV with dark windows parked half a block down. Press, Chad, and Brody got out. Press was vibrating with a crazy giddy energy. Okay, he hissed. Chad, you watch the street. Brody, you're with me. Harrison said the alley door. They moved quickly, slipping into the narrow alley behind the building. They found the heavy steel service door. Press tried the handle. It was locked, but the key card Harrison had given him, a master for the building, slid into the reader. A quiet click echoed in the alley. They were in. They weren't in her studio. Not yet. They were in a dark, musty service hallway. Press led the way, climbing the stairs to the first-floor landing. He grinned. The landlord said her studio has a back entrance, a small door from the main hall. It's how they move furniture. It's not her main door. He jiggled the handle of the plain, unmarked wooden door. It was locked, but with a simple standard lock. Brody, using a credit card, broke it open in seconds. Hugo's alarms were on the other side of the studio, at the main entrance and window. They had bypassed the security completely. They stepped inside. The studio was filled with light, color, and the clean, sharp smell of her life. Canvases were everywhere. Press's smile was predatory. Wow, Brody whispered, looking at a huge, stunning painting of the Forsyth Fountain. She's actually good. She's trash, Press spat, his embarrassment returning. She's nothing. He walked over to the painting Brody admired, and with a sudden violent motion, punched his fist directly through the center of the canvas. The sound of the tight fabric ripping was loud and final. That one act broke the dam. Brody and Chad, who had crept in, stared in shock. Then a nervous, ugly energy took over. It was a frenzy. They didn't just break things. They violated them. Chad grabbed a hammer from Iris's toolbox and began smashing the legs of her easels. Brody, seeing jars of vibrant pigment, laughed and began throwing them against the walls, creating grotesque starburst-shaped explosions of red and blue. Press himself went for the finished paintings, the ones leaning against the wall ready for a gallery show. He pulled out a box cutter, the one Iris used for stretching her canvas, and began slashing. The portrait of the woman, her face peaceful, was destroyed. The salt marsh at sunrise, a work of deep peace, was cut into ribbons. It was over in 3 minutes. The room was a hurricane of destruction, a storm of overturned turpentine, shattered wood, and ruined dreams. Okay, Brody panted, his adrenaline fading, replaced by fear. Okay, Press, let's go, we did it, let's go. Wait, Press said. His eyes were wide, gleaming. He had loved every second of it. One more thing. He rummaged in his bag and pulled out a can of red spray paint. He walked over to the one large untouched white wall, the wall Iris used to project her sketches. He shook the can, the rattling ball echoing in the destroyed room, and in large dripping angry letters. He wrote the one thing he knew would break her more than the art. Iris returned 15 minutes later, a bag of groceries in her lap. She was almost humming, thinking about Valor. She rolled up to her main door, saw the thin alarm wire was still perfectly in place, and smiled. She was safe. She unlocked her 3 locks, pushed the door open, and rolled inside. The smell hit her first, not paint and turpentine, but the sickening chemical aerosol of spray paint. She looked up. Her world, her life, her soul was gone. It was a war zone. Canvases were slashed, easels shattered. Her paints, her precious expensive paints, were a thick, toxic sludge covering the floor. Her vision tunneled. She couldn't breathe. She thought she was going to be sick. And then she saw it. On the far wall, the only clean space, the red paint still dripping. Next time it's the dog. She didn't scream. She didn't make a sound. All the air left her body, and she just sat there, a silent, broken statue in the middle of her own destroyed grave. The call came at 11 a.m. Hugo was cleaning his rifle, a normal-looking civilian version he'd bought locally, a ritual of maintenance and focus, when his burner phone vibrated. He answered. Yeah, Hugo. The voice on the other end was not Iris, not the woman he'd met anyway. This voice was a hollow, dead thing, a dry whisper of air passing over vocal cords. It was the voice of someone who had seen the absolute end of their world. It's gone. That was all my studio. It's all gone. He wrote on the wall. Hugo. The dog. He wrote about the dog. The dead tone was 1,000 times more alarming than her panic had been. Panic meant fight. This was broken. Stay there, he said, his voice dropping into that calm, flat register. Don't touch anything. I'm coming. He was already moving, his rifle taken apart and packed, his small kit bag zipped. He was out the door of his rented motel room in 45 seconds. He arrived at her studio in 6 minutes, taking the alley route. He saw her through the open door, a solitary still figure in her wheelchair, her back to him, facing the far wall. She was just sitting, staring. The smell of aerosol, turpentine, and paint hit him like a physical wall. He stepped inside, his boots crunching on the broken pieces of a shattered pigment jar. His eyes did a single complete sweep of the room. It was not vandalism. It was a psychological execution. The slashed canvases, the shattered easels, the sludge of paint and solvent that had been her life's work. And then the wall, the bright dripping red. Next time it's the dog. He felt his heartbeat, a single hard cold drum. He walked past her and knelt, his fingers lightly touching the frame of the main door. The thin, strong trip wire he had set was still perfectly there. He looked at the fire escape window. The wire was still there. They hadn't come in the ways he'd protected. They had come in another way. His mind flashed to the lawyer, Harrison. This was not the rash, stupid anger of a rich kid. This was a planned, deliberate, strategic message. They had gotten around his security. They had escalated. They had threatened a direct future action. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The system, he knew, was not just broken. It was actively hostile. Officer Miller, Arthur Harrison, they were all part of the same wall of power, and he, Hugo, had just been outmaneuvered. Okay, he said, his voice quiet. He walked over to her, crouching so she could see him without turning. Iris, we're leaving. She didn't respond. Her eyes were unfocused, fixed on the red letters. Iris, he said, a little firmer, listen to me. This room is a crime scene, but we're not calling the cops. This is my fault. I put up a defense and they got around it. That won't happen again. He touched her arm, a firm, grounding pressure. They want you to break. We're not going to let them. Pack a bag, laptop, clothes for 3 days, your medication, nothing else, we're going. She finally turned, her eyes slowly focusing on him. They were empty. He won, she whispered. He took my work. He took me. He took things. Hugo countered, his voice hard as stone. You are still here. Your talent is still here. But we are not safe here. They just proved that. Pack now, we have 10 minutes. The command in his voice finally pierced her shock. She nodded, a single numb motion, and rolled toward her dresser, her wheels leaving clean tracks through the sludge of paint. While she packed, Hugo went to his rental car and got a black-hardened case from the trunk, his real kit. He brought it inside and pulled out a small magnetic disc, a GPS tracker with an audio feed. He also grabbed a high-sensitivity directional microphone. He was done with defense. He got Iris checked into a new place, an anonymous chain motel off the I-16, miles from the historic district and its web of influence. He paid cash, using a name that wasn't his. "Stay here," he told her, his gaze intense. "Keep the door locked. Do not use the hotel Wi-Fi. Do not call anyone. I will be the only person who comes to this door. I have to go get your dog." He left her there, a ghost in a beige room, and drove straight to the vet clinic. Dr. Thorne was at the front desk. "I'm here for Valor," Hugo said. Dr. Thorne, the vet with the kind eyes, looked at Hugo, really looked at him, seeing the new cold fire in his gaze. "He's all paid for," Dr. Thorne said quietly. "An anonymous benefactor, a wire transfer from a law firm, Harrison." Hugo felt the muscles in his back tighten. He's still healing, but he's mobile. He needs rest. "He'll get it," Hugo said. A worker brought Valor out. The dog was bandaged tightly around his body, but his eyes were bright, and the moment he saw Hugo, his tail gave a weak, happy wag. "Let's go, boy," Hugo murmured, scratching his ear. Valor was his partner now, the bait. Hugo did not return to Iris. He returned to the scene of the crime. He and Valor went back to the destroyed studio. The smell was overwhelming. Valor whined, sensing the violation, his nose wrinkling at the chemical stench. "Easy," Hugo whispered. "We're just waiting." He knew they would be back. The message on the wall wasn't a threat, it was a promise. They thought Iris was broken and gone. They thought the dog was an easy target, but they didn't know he was still there. He needed to know when. He left Valor in the studio. The new tripwires on the doors and windows, now far more sophisticated, and went hunting. It was easy to find President. He was exactly where a young, arrogant man would be after such a victory. The rooftop bar of the city's most expensive hotel, drinking with Chad and Brody. They were loud, triumphant, and drunk. Hugo sat in his car across the street, the directional mic in his lap, the foam earpiece secure. He just listened. He heard them bragging, reliving the destruction, laughing about the look on her face, or the look they imagined on her face. Hugo's breathing remained slow, steady. He just gathered information. Finally, after an hour of their drunken celebration, Press raised his glass. To a message sent, he slurred. "I'm telling you, it's done, she's gone." Harrison's guy confirmed she rolled out of her studio with a bag. Didn't even call the cops. "She's terrified. She's broken." "What about that guy?" Chad asked, his voice still holding a nervous edge. "The one from the park." "What about him?" Press sneered. "He's probably with her. He's on leave. He can't do anything. He's probably 100 miles away by now. Scared of getting in trouble." Press took a long drink. "But we're not finished. That message. Next time it's the dog. Harrison called my dad. He said the vet called him again asking about the final bill. The dog's there alone. The girl's gone. The seal's gone. The dog is just sitting there." Hugo's blood ran cold. The phone call had been a trap. Harrison had baited the vet. He had fed Press this information. This was a setup. Press stood up, unsteady on his feet, his voice loud with whiskey. "She left him, just like I said she would. So here's the plan. We go right now. We grab the dog. We take him to the Talmadge Bridge, and we throw him off. End of story. Let's go." Hugo didn't wait to hear more. He was already starting his car. They thought they were going to a vet clinic. They thought they were picking up a helpless dog. But Hugo was faster. He raced back to the studio. He had maybe 15 minutes. He got inside, his movements quick and smooth. He turned to Valor, who was resting by the door, alert. "Okay, boy," he whispered, "we've got company." He shut down the power to the entire studio, plunging the room into the deep urban darkness of the alley. He picked a spot, a dark corner where the shadows were deepest, and he sat, his back against the wall, his case open at his feet. Valor, sensing the shift, moved silently beside him, letting out a low, almost inaudible rumble. Hugo placed a calming hand on his fur. Sure, not yet. He sat in the dark, a shadow, and he waited for the sound of the key card in the alley service door. The trap was set. The studio was a black hole, a pocket of absolute darkness that had swallowed all light. The air was thick with the chemical stench of aerosol and the phantom smell of old paint. Hugo Scott sat on the floor in the far corner, his back against the wall, his breathing slow and rhythmic, so quiet it was indistinguishable from the building's own faint settling sounds. He was a creature of the dark, and in this environment, he was the top predator. He listened. He heard the distant scrape of the alley service door, the one Harrison had compromised. He heard the muffled angry voices of 3 men in the service hallway. They were frustrated. Their trip to the vet clinic had been a failure, just as he'd known it would be. He heard the snick of a credit card sliding into the lock of the back studio door, the unsecured entrance. He heard the quiet click as the latch gave way. Valor, his bandaged ribs healed just enough for him to be mobile, was secured in the small windowless bathroom, just as Hugo had planned. The dog was the bait, but he would also be the final necessary witness. The door opened. 3 distinct shapes, blacker than the black, showed themselves against the faint light of the hallway before stepping inside, plunging the room back into total darkness. "I told you he'd be here," Press Davenport's voice whispered, tight with frustration. "She left him. The coward left him. Just find him." Chad's voice rumbled, nervous. "This place gives me the creeps." A moment later, 3 beams of light, cell phone flashlights, cut through the black. It was the mistake Hugo had been counting on. They were 3 bright bouncing targets, and they had just ruined their own night vision. "Spread out," Press commanded. "Check the kitchen, Brody. Chad, the easels." Brody, the tall, skinny one, moved first, his light beam dancing nervously over the shattered canvases. He was jumpy, moving too quickly. He passed the dark alcove, where the small kitchen was. Hugo moved. He was a shadow detaching from other shadows. He didn't come from behind. He emerged from the side, stepping into Brody's path. Brody gasped, his flashlight beam swinging up, lighting Hugo's emotionless face for a split second. It was the last thing he saw. Hugo's hand, moving in a rigid, precise chop, struck the side of Brody's neck, a nerve strike that sent a shock through his nervous system. Brody's phone clattered to the floor. He dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut, not making a sound. Hugo caught the phone before it went dark, pocketed it, and dragged the unconscious man behind a large overturned tapestry, securing his hands behind his back with a heavy-duty zip tie. "One down." "Brody," Chad called out from across the room, his voice tight. "You dropped something?" He was standing among the ruined easels, his own light sweeping back and forth. "Press, I don't." "Brody, he's probably fine, you idiot," Press hissed from the center of the room. "Find the dog." Chad, trying to be brave, moved forward. "Brody, answer me." He was a bigger man, the muscle of the group, and he was trying to be threatening, but his light beam was shaking. Hugo, using the broken furniture as a maze, circled around him in the dark. He made a small noise, a soft scuff of a boot on the floor, 10 feet to Chad's left. Chad spun, his light catching nothing. "Who's there?" That was all the misdirection Hugo needed. He closed the distance from the right. He didn't strike, he grabbed. His left hand seized Chad's right wrist, the one holding the phone, and his right hand clamped onto the elbow. He applied a simple, brutal joint lock, twisting the arm in a way it was not meant to bend. Chad roared in pain, his phone flying from his numb fingers. Hugo used the man's own forward momentum to spin him, driving him face first into the floor. A knee pressed between his shoulder blades, and the fight was over before it began. "Stop, please." Chad wheezed into the paint-soaked floor. Another zip tie. 2 down. Now there was only President. He was standing alone in the vast darkness, his light beam flashing wildly. Chad, what's happening?" "This isn't funny." He was breathing in short, panic gasps. He was alone, and he knew it. He started backing toward the door he'd come through. And then from the bathroom came the sound Hugo had been waiting for, a soft whine. Valor, hearing the commotion, was asking if it was time. "The dog," Press whispered, his panic momentarily forgotten, replaced by his cruelty. He spun, his light fixing on the bathroom door. There you are. I've got you now, you. He stalked toward the door, his hand outstretched, fumbling for the knob. He was completely exposed, his back to the room. Click. The main overhead track lights flashed on, flooding the studio in a harsh, brilliant white. Press cried out, spinning, his hand flying to his eyes, completely blind. When his vision cleared, he saw them, Chad and Brody, side by side on the floor, awake, gagged with strips of canvas and bound. And sitting in Iris's simple wooden desk chair, bathed in the light, was Hugo. He was calm, his legs crossed, holding a single loop zip tie in his hands. Press's entire body went cold. The terror from the park returned 1,000 times worse. You were here, he stammered. You waited for us. You shouldn't have come back, Press, Hugo said, his voice level. He stood up slowly. Press, in a desperate animal panic, looked around and seized the only weapon he could find, a heavy broken leg from a shattered easel. Stay back, he shrieked, his voice cracking. I'll kill you. I swear I will. Hugo just looked at the makeshift club, then at Press's terrified, hate-filled eyes. Drop it, Press screamed, a high-pitched, wordless sound of rage and fear, and lunged, swinging the club wildly. Hugo didn't even step back. He stepped into the attack, his left hand deflecting the clumsy swing, while his right hand shot out, seizing Press's wrist. He twisted. A wet, sickening snap echoed in the studio, louder than the scream that followed. Press collapsed, clutching his shattered arm, the club clattering to the floor. I told you to drop it, Hugo said. He bound Press's remaining good hand to his feet. 3 down. Hugo walked over to his case. He took out his combat knife. With a steady hand, he drew the blade across his own left forearm, a deep, precise cut that bled instantly, but hit no major arteries. He let the blood drip onto the floor. Then he walked over to Press, who was sobbing in pain, and picked up his phone. He dialed 911. His voice was calm, but now it held a new breathless urgency. My name is Hugo Scott. I'm at 14B West Charlton Lane. I'm reporting a break-in. Yes? 3 men. They attacked me. They broke in through a back door. I managed to stop them, but I'm bleeding. One of them had a knife. Please send police. I think I need an ambulance. He read the address and hung up. The police arrived in under 3 minutes, sirens wailing. This time it wasn't Officer Miller. The first 2 through the door were uniformed, guns drawn, followed by a woman in a detective's plain clothes. This was Sergeant Elena Reyes, a sharp, no-nonsense officer with dark, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She took in the scene, the 3 bound men, the destroyed room, and Hugo leaning against the wall, his arm wrapped in a bloody rag. What in the world happened here? She commanded. They broke in, Hugo said, his voice strained. It's the second time they did this. Yesterday. Press, seeing the police, found his voice. He's lying. It's a trap. He attacked us. Call my father. Call Arthur Harrison. You'll all be fired. Sergeant Reyes looked from the sobbing, arrogant Press to the terrified Chad and Brody, to the key card that had fallen from Press's pocket, and then to the chilling red message on the wall. She knelt by Hugo. You're military, she said, seeing his posture, not asking. Hugo nodded, wincing, and showed her his active duty ID. They assaulted me and my friend in the park 2 days ago, he said. The police, they wouldn't help. This was their second attack. They came for the dog. Reyes's face hardened. She understood. She stood up and looked at President. You're under arrest for breaking and entering, aggravated assault, and battery of a federal operative. You can call your lawyer from the holding cell. The sun was just beginning to stain the sky a pale, bruised gray when Hugo finally returned to the motel. He used his key, letting himself in quietly. Iris was awake, sitting in her wheelchair, her face pale. Vala was asleep at the foot of her bed. She had been waiting all night. She saw him. His T-shirt was torn and stained. His arm was professionally bandaged. It's over, he said. It wasn't a question. It's over, he confirmed. They were arrested, caught in the act with the break-in, the assault on me, and the evidence in the studio. Not even their family can make this disappear. Iris just stared at his arm. They hurt you. It's a scratch, he said, dismissing it. He sat on the edge of the other bed, the exhaustion of the last 48 hours finally settling on him. The fight was done. The silence in the small beige room was absolute. Iris rolled her chair closer, her hand trembling, reached out. She didn't touch his wound. She laid her small paint-stained hand over his larger rough one. It was the first time she had reached for him. He turned his hand over, his fingers linking with hers, a silent, powerful connection. "What now?" she whispered. Hugo looked at their joined hands, then at her, and for the first time, she saw the coldness in his gray eyes fade, replaced by something entirely new, something like peace. "Now," he said, "we rest." If this story of courage and justice touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. We want to know your thoughts. What did you learn from Iris's resilience and Hugo's quiet code of honor? Let us know in the comments below. We pray that God blesses you and your family. May He keep you safe from harm, and may He give you the strength to be a protector for others in your own life. If you believe in the power of justice and in the grace of divine protection, please write Amen in the comments below to share your faith with our community. Thank you for watching.